In Flint, Michigan, and Lordstown, Ohio, the impact was immediate. Local restaurants deserted, barbershops closed, and small businesses waited for the consequences. This wasn't simply another corporate shuffle. It was a stark warning of how swiftly the ground can disappear beneath American workers. And then, just as the shock subsided, Donald Trump burst. Calling GM's decision a betrayal of America, Trump went on a heated diatribe, demanding immediate vengeance and vowing to defend American jobs at whatever cost. He stated that GM accepted public bailouts just to betray the very people who had saved them. But what exactly transpired behind closed doors? Why would General Motors shut down production lines throughout America, risking public outrage and political firestorms during an election season? And is Trump's reaction merely a publicity stunt? Or is there a larger conflict forming between America's blue-collar workers, business titans, and politicians scurrying to take a side? Let's break everything down. It began with a leaked email at midnight. Managers at General Motors factories in Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana were instructed to collect their staff first thing in the morning. Workers thought it was another safety meeting or a production update. Instead, they strolled quietly. On the factory floor, managers read from a printed statement. GM was suspending production immediately across many sites effective that day. There was no staged shutdown, no severance packages planned, and no clear strategy for when or if lines would reopen. Employees were directed to clean their lockers, return their credentials, and await further instructions. Thousands of American workers lost their jobs overnight. What's the reason? GM cited a perfect storm of challenges, including EV battery supply constraints, worldwide component delays, growing operational expenses, and a significant reduction in demand for certain models. Nothing mattered to the workers, however. One day, they were manufacturing America's trucks and automobiles. The next moment, they were standing in the July heat, watching security officers close the industrial doors. The shock hit local companies immediately. Cafes that opened before morning to serve line workers reported empty tables. Gas stations near facility gates sold half their normal gallons. Mayors hurried to contact General Motors, seeking answers, while unions prepared for emergency meetings. But this was more than just a corporate choice. It was the first falling domino in a far larger saga of political upheaval and economic disaster that was about to slam America. Behind the scenes, GM's management has been in crisis mode for months. The transition to electric vehicles had depleted GM's financial reserves, and Wall Street investors were getting frustrated with slow returns. At the same time, traditional gas-powered trucks and SUVs, GM's cash cows, were experiencing diminishing sales due to rising loan rates and inflation. Then followed the supply chain nightmare. Critical EV battery components from Asia were delayed, and taxes on Chinese-made parts raised prices for everything from seat frames to computer processors. Even as GM attempted to expand its EV options, it was unable to obtain the necessary parts in a timely manner to fulfill demand, or regulatory requirements connected to green subsidies. Internally, management discussed whether to continue bleeding cash to maintain idle manufacturing lines, or to absorb the penalty now to stabilize finances. Pressure from shareholders tilted the balance. A leaked CFO study stated that sustaining current production levels while shifting to EVs would pose an existential risk to General Motors' financial viability. Union tensions worsened the situation. Talks with the UAW around EV job security and compensation structures have periodically stagnated as workers fear layoffs due to automation and factory restructuring. Faced with potential strikes and rising expenses, GM executives saw shutting down operations as the least terrible alternative. To the GM boardroom, it was a cold calculation for survival. The workers felt betrayed, and it laid the atmosphere for a political eruption as Donald Trump prepared to capitalize on the chaos and fear that was sweeping across America's heartland. Donald Trump wasted no time turning General Motors' shutdown into his latest rallying cry. Within hours of the news surfacing, Trump turned to Truth Social, exclaiming in all capitals, "GM betrays America. We saved them. Now they leave our workers behind." At a hastily organized gathering in Ohio, Trump gave a heated address to a sea of fans, many of whom wore hard helmets and union jackets. GM took billions in taxpayer bailouts. They took our money and your money, and now they're shutting down our factories and shipping our future overseas, he said, jabbing his finger in the air. Trump pledged quick reprisal, threatening a fresh round of tariffs on foreign-made automobiles and parts, explicitly targeting any imports that GM may rely on to keep its profits alive. If GM thinks they can abandon American workers and then bring in cheap parts from China, they've got another thing coming, Trump stated to wild applause. However, Trump's focus was not only on GM. He characterized the closure as evidence that America's business behemoths were abandoning the same people who built their fortunes. He stated that under his leadership, we will bring every job back, hold every CEO accountable, and protect American workers at all costs. Behind the scenes, Trump's team began working on plans for punitive measures against GM and incentives for other automakers eager to maintain facilities in the United States. Trump saw GM's action as more than a commercial decision. It was a political gift, allowing him to present himself as the final line of defense for American workers as the election season heated up. While politicians blamed one another and business executives defended spreadsheets, America's small communities bore the brunt of the consequences. In Flint, Michigan, and Lordstown, Ohio, the GM shutdown was more than just a story. It was a gut hit that devastated families overnight. The normal morning bustle vanished from neighborhood eateries, leaving just vacant chairs and cold coffee behind. Mechanics who used to maintain GM workers' trucks saw their business dry up. Barbershops that relied on frequent walk-ins now tallied every customer. The unexpected loss of hundreds of salaries meant that groceries went unpaid, rent slipped behind, and children sensed stress at dinner tables. For many families, GM represented more than simply a job. It was a heritage. Grandfathers, dads, and sons all walked the same factory floors, trusting that their employment will always be available. Fathers are now returning home in the middle of the day with cardboard boxes full of personal goods, attempting to explain to their children why dad was not returning to work. Local mayors scrambled, convening emergency meetings, contacting state lawmakers, and begging with GM for a reversal. Non-union suppliers and small firms that rely on manufacturing workers were pushed to the brink, with many compelled to lay off their own staff. The emotional toll was palpable. A single mother sobbing in her car after realizing her shift had ended, an elderly guy peering through a fence at the silent plant, and a teenage son silently canceling college plans because he knew the money was gone. In these communities, the GM closure was not about electric automobiles or trade conflicts. It was about survival, dignity, and the dread of losing an already disappearing way of life. As the shock of GM's shutdown spread throughout America, Donald Trump saw an opportunity to escalate his ongoing struggle with corporate America. To Trump, GM was more than simply another firm making tough decisions in a changing market. It represented corporations leaving the American worker for boardroom riches and offshore transactions. At rallies, Trump cast GM's decision as part of a wider betrayal, alleging that globalist CEOs were pocketing government cash while hollowing out the middle class. He accused General Motors of profiting from green energy subsidies while disregarding the people who created their enterprise. They want to go electric, but they don't want to keep American factories alive, Trump raged, demanding a study of every subsidy and tax advantage GM had ever gotten. Meanwhile, GM's executives said they were adjusting to a changing environment and were compelled to shift to electric vehicles in order to compete with Tesla and Chinese automakers. However, Trump fought back, warning that a hasty rush toward EVs would kill employment, deplete neighborhoods, and make America reliant on foreign resources for battery manufacture. Other manufacturers remained silent, fearing they would be Trump's next target if they transferred manufacturing overseas or closed operations. Wall Street experts warn that Trump's tariff threats will spark retaliatory trade battles, raising automobile prices for consumers. But for Trump, this was both personal and political. GM's decision fueled his America First narrative, casting Trump as the only leader prepared to tackle corporate behemoths while protecting workers in America's heartland. With elections approaching, Trump was prepared to use GM's closure as a rallying cry for a larger struggle, saying that the war for America's industrial soul was far from finished. GM's closure was more than just another business story. It was a seismic jolt felt across America's working communities, pushing families to reconsider their future and leaders to choose sides. As factories went silent, small companies closed and ambitions were put on wait. The conflict between corporate survival and community survival became unavoidable. Donald Trump seizes the opportunity, transforming GM's decision into a symbol of corporate greed and unfulfilled promises. His fervent promise to react rekindled arguments about tariffs, trade, and America's role in a changing global economy. Meanwhile, GM said it was striving to survive in a rapidly changing world, even while communities suffered the consequences. Now America is at a crossroads. Can it move to new technology without abandoning the workers who created its past? Can politicians safeguard American employment while competing worldwide? Or will businesses continue to seek profits wherever they can? As the dust settles, one thing is certain: the war between corporate behemoths, political power, and American workers is far from done. What happens next will influence not only GM's destiny, but also the future of America. If you care about American employment and want to know the truth that the media won't tell you, click the subscribe button and enable alerts so you never miss an important breakdown. Share your opinions in the comments. Should GM pay for this, or was it the only option?